Arthur Pendleton thought he knew everything about his wife of 25 years, until a bout of the flu kept him home on a Tuesday morning, and he witnessed a ritual he was never meant to see. The silence in the Pendleton house was usually a comfort, the kind of quiet that settles into the corners of a ranch-style home after the children have grown and gone. But today, the silence felt heavy, punctuated only by the rattling of the heating vents fighting against the November chill sweeping through Maple Creek. Arthur lay on the beige sectional sofa, a mountain of used tissues on the coffee table beside a bottle of Vicks VapoRub and a cooling cup of black coffee. He was a man of routine, a quality control engineer at the local auto assembly plant, and being home on a Tuesday at 10 a.m. felt almost illicit. For 2 decades, he had been on the factory floor by 7 a.m., leaving the morning hours entirely to Martha. Martha was in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already spotless. She moved with a nervous energy that Arthur attributed to his presence disrupting her schedule. He watched her from the living room, admiring the way the gray morning light caught the silver streaks in her hair. She was the anchor of his life, the woman who had stretched every dollar during the lean years and softened every blow life had thrown at them. "Honey," Arthur croaked, his voice thick with congestion. He reached for a glossy brochure resting under the TV remote. It was for a tour of Tuscany, a dream they had whispered about since their 20s. "I was thinking, since I'm stuck here, maybe we could finally look at dates for the anniversary trip? The deposit is due next month." Martha froze. The sponge in her hand stopped mid-circle on the granite. She didn't turn around immediately. "Arthur, we talked about this," she said, her voice tight. "It's not the right time. It's our 25th, Martha. I've picked up extra shifts. The pension looks good. Why are we always acting like we're broke?" Arthur's frustration was mild, tempered by his fever, but it was there. He made a good living. The mortgage was manageable. Yet, every time he tried to spend money on them, she panicked. "It's not about being broke," she said, finally turning. Her smile was brittle, not reaching her eyes. "It's about being careful. You never know what could happen. The roof might need repairs. The car." She trailed off, glancing at the wall clock. It was 10:40 a.m. Suddenly, her demeanor shifted. The domestic fussing stopped. She untied her apron and folded it with precise, practiced movements. "I have to run out," she announced, avoiding his gaze. "Just a few errands. Grocery store. Post office." Arthur frowned. "No. You usually go on Thursdays." "Just things I need to get done," she murmured. She walked past him to the hallway closet. Arthur watched, bewildered, as she pulled out her good navy wool coat and wrapped a silk scarf around her neck. She checked her reflection in the mirror, smoothing her hair, applying a fresh layer of lipstick. This wasn't the attire for a quick milk run to Kroger. This was how she dressed for church, or a parent-teacher conference, or an appointment. "Do you want me to drive you?" Arthur offered, trying to sit up. "I'm feeling a bit better." "No." The answer was too sharp, too immediate. She softened it instantly. "No, you rest. You're sick. I'll be back by 1. She stood by the door, her hand on the knob, watching the second hand on the grandfather clock tick. 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 At exactly 10:47 a.m., not a minute sooner or later, she opened the door. "Rest, Arthur," she said, and then she was gone. Arthur sat in the empty house, the click of the lock echoing in his ears. He pulled himself up and walked to the window, parting the curtains just enough to see the driveway. Martha climbed into their silver Honda, checked her phone for a brief second, and backed out with a sense of urgency that didn't match her story. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach, one that had nothing to do with the flu virus. He was a man who looked for defects in steel and rubber for a living. He knew how to spot a hairline fracture before the whole structure collapsed. And right now, he was looking at a fracture in his marriage. Why 10:47? Why the nice coat? Why the panic about money? He pulled up their bank app on his phone. The checking account was normal. Savings untouched. On the surface, everything was perfect. But underneath, something was rotting. As Arthur watches her car disappear down the street, he makes a silent vow. Next Tuesday, he won't be at work. He will be right behind her. 20 years is a lifetime to keep a secret. If you find this story valuable so far, please leave a number 8 in the comments to show your support. And if you haven't already, I invite you to subscribe to Black King and turn on the bell. We are dedicated to telling stories that inform, inspire, and touch the heart. Thank you for being here. Now, let's follow Arthur into the unknown. 7 days is a long time for a man with a suspicious mind, but for Arthur, the week dragged on like a slow-motion car crash waiting to happen. He went to work at the assembly plant, checking the welds on chassis frames with his usual precision, but his mind was back in that silent house. Every evening, he watched Martha with a new, painful intensity. He noticed things he had previously ignored, small details that now screamed for attention. On Thursday night, he saw her sitting at the kitchen table, aggressively cutting coupons from the local circular. She wasn't just clipping deals for coffee or detergent. She was hunting for 50-cent savings on generic brands with a desperation that unsettled him. On Saturday, when the zipper on her winter coat snagged, instead of agreeing to buy a new one, she spent 2 hours fixing it with pliers and a safety pin. "It's got plenty of life left in it," she had insisted, her voice tight. It was the behavior of someone living on the brink of poverty, not the wife of a senior engineer with a fully funded 401k. When Tuesday morning finally arrived, the sky over Maple Creek was the color of bruised slate. Arthur had laid the groundwork the night before, telling Martha he had a personal day to burn before the end of the year and would be heading out early to help a buddy fix a transmission. Instead, he drove his Ford sedan 2 blocks over, parked it behind a line of overgrown hedges near the community park, and waited. At 10:30 a.m., he circled back on foot, slipping into the neighbor's side yard where he had a clear view of his own driveway. He felt ridiculous, a grown man skulking in the bushes like a character in a bad noir movie, spying on the woman who washed his socks and knew how he took his coffee. But the knot in his stomach hadn't loosened. It had tightened into a hard stone of dread. At 10:47 a.m. sharp, the garage door rumbled open. The silver Honda backed out, exhaust pluming white in the freezing air. Martha was behind the wheel, staring straight ahead, her face set in a grim mask Arthur didn't recognize. Arthur sprinted back to his car, his breath burning in his lungs. He waited for her taillights to turn onto Main Street before pulling out. He kept a safe distance, 3 cars back, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. She drove past the grocery store. She drove past the post office. She drove past the turnoff for her sister's house. "Where are you going, Martha?" he whispered to the empty car. She turned left into the downtown district, where the brick buildings were older and the businesses more serious. She bypassed the modern Chase branch with its drive-through ATMs and pulled into the cracked asphalt lot of First Heritage Bank, a relic from the 80s that sat in the shadow of the old courthouse. Arthur pulled into a spot across the street, idling in front of a closed bakery. He watched as Martha got out. She didn't go inside. Instead, she walked to the far edge of the lot, near a concrete pillar that blocked the wind. She stood there, clutching her purse against her chest, shivering not just from the cold, but from something else entirely. A few minutes later, a sleek black Lexus pulled into the lot. It looked alien against the backdrop of rusted pickups and sensible sedans typical of Maple Creek. The driver didn't park. He idled next to where Martha was standing. A man stepped out. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Arthur's first car. This was Silas Vane. Arthur didn't know the name yet, but he knew the type. Vane looked like he belonged in a boardroom in downtown Chicago, not a drafty parking lot in Ohio. Arthur held his breath, waiting for the betrayal. He expected a hug, a kiss, a secret intimacy. But there was no affection. Martha didn't move toward him. She shrank back. Vane said something short and sharp, his posture commanding. In response, Martha reached into her purse and pulled out a thick brown envelope. It was heavy. She handed it to him with trembling hands. Vane took it without a thank you. He flipped the flap open, thumbed through the contents. Cash, Arthur realized with a jolt, and then slipped it into his inside jacket pocket. He looked at Martha with a sneer that was visible even from across the street, said one final thing that made her flinch, and got back into his luxury car. Arthur froze behind his steering wheel, his breath fogging the glass, as he realized the look in his wife's eyes isn't love. It is pure, unadulterated fear. He didn't confront Martha in the parking lot. He knew that a scene in public would only drive her further into her shell. Instead, he watched the black Lexus speed away, then waited until Martha's Honda limped out of the lot before starting his own engine. He didn't go back to work. He went to the public library, a quiet brick building on 3rd Street where the internet was fast and the librarians asked no questions. He spent 3 hours digging. It didn't take long to connect the license plate he'd memorized to a series of LLCs registered to one Silas Vane. The search results were a graveyard of small businesses, foreclosures, liens, and court cases settled quietly out of sight. Silas Vane wasn't a lover. He was a shark who fed on the desperate. Arthur returned home before Martha, his mind racing. The house was warm, the gas fireplace flickering with a cozy, deceptive glow that contrasted sharply with the cold dread settling in his bones. He sat at the kitchen table, the heart of their home. To his left, he placed the glossy brochure for the tour of Tuscany. To his right, he placed a single sheet of notebook paper with the name Silas Vane written in his blocky engineer's script. When the front door opened at 5 p.m., the air pressure in the room seemed to drop. Martha walked in, carrying grocery bags as a prop for her earlier lie. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped under the weight of an invisible yoke. "Arthur," she called out, spotting him at the table. "I thought you were resting." "Sit down, Martha." His voice wasn't angry. It was terrifyingly calm. She froze, her eyes darting to the paper on the table. She recognized the name immediately. The color drained from her face so fast Arthur thought she might faint. She dropped the grocery bags. A carton of milk split open, leaking white onto the hardwood, but neither of them moved to clean it up. "You know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know you're not having an affair," Arthur said gently. "I know you met a man named Silas Vane today. And I know he hurts people for money." He leaned forward. "Does this have to do with Robert?" The mention of her father, who had passed away from a sudden heart attack exactly 20 years ago, broke the dam. Martha collapsed into the chair, burying her face in her hands. "He left a mess, Arthur. He borrowed money to try and save the hardware store. Not from a bank, they wouldn't touch him. He went to Vane." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "When Dad died, Vane came to the funeral. He told me he held a promissory note. He was going to take Mom's house. He was going to sue the estate. I couldn't let Mom lose her home. I couldn't let your name be dragged through the mud." "So you paid him," Arthur said. $500 a week," Martha sobbed. "Cash. Every Tuesday. For 20 years. Arthur's mind, trained to calculate loads and stresses, did the math instantly. $500 a week. 52 weeks a year. 20 years. The number hit him like a physical blow to the chest. "Martha," he said, his voice trembling. That's over $500,000. $500,000. We could have bought 3 houses. We could have retired." "I know," she wailed. "I tried to stop. I told him I've paid enough. But he says the interest. He says the late fees from the first year compounded. He says I still owe $40,000 just to close the account." Arthur stood up. The sickness from the flu was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. He wasn't looking at a woman who had betrayed him. He was looking at a victim who had been bleeding out for 2 decades to keep their family safe. He walked around the table and stood over her, not in anger at her, but in cold fury at Silas. He looked at his weeping wife and said, "Show me the receipts, Martha. Every single one. $500,000 in secret payments. It is a heartbreaking discovery." If you are still watching and find value in this detailed story, please comment the number 1 below. It tells me you are engaged. Also, make sure to subscribe to the Black King channel and hit the notification bell. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing you this great content every day. Now, let's see how they fight back. Numbers don't lie, but they can certainly hide crimes if you don't look closely enough, and Arthur Pendelton was finally looking. The kitchen table, usually reserved for Sunday roasts and holiday puzzles, was now a war room buried under a blizzard of yellowed paper. For 3 nights, Arthur hadn't slept. He had taken the shoebox Martha had hidden in the back of her closet, the coffin of her freedom, she called it, and entered every single handwritten receipt into a spreadsheet on his laptop. The data was a horrifying testament to endurance. March 2004, $500. April 2004, $2,000. It went on row after endless row, a financial drip feed that had bled his wife dry. He restructured it 5 years ago, Martha said quietly, placing a fresh cup of coffee near his elbow. He said if I signed a new agreement, he'd lower the weekly payment slightly, but extend the term. I thought he was being kind. Arthur stopped typing. Kind? Martha, look at this. He turned the screen toward her. According to Ohio state usury laws, the maximum interest rate for a personal loan of this type is capped. When he restructured this in 2019, he effectively created a new contract. But he kept charging you 25% interest disguised as administrative fees. That's not just unfair, it's illegal. The realization gave Arthur a target. He wasn't a lawyer, but he knew how to find people who were. He spent the next morning making calls, eventually reaching the office of Clara Vance, a senior investigator at the State Department of Financial Institutions. He didn't tell her everything over the phone, just enough to get her attention: predatory lending, elder abuse, and 20 years of cash receipts. They met at Rusty's Diner on the edge of town, a place where the vinyl booths were patched with duct tape and the coffee was strong enough to strip paint. Inspector Clara Vance was a sharp-featured woman in her 40s with eyes that looked like they had seen every scam in the book. She listened without interrupting as Arthur laid out the spreadsheet and the stack of original receipts. She picked up a receipt from 2020. Cash only. No bank trail. Smart, she muttered. Then she looked at the spreadsheet Arthur had built. Her expression shifted from skepticism to impressed surprise. You've done my job for me, Mr. Pendelton. Most victims don't keep records. They're too ashamed. But this. She tapped the stack. This proves a pattern. And you said he threatened her mother's home. For 20 years, Arthur said, his voice hard. That upgrades it from usury to extortion, Clara said, leaning back. We've been trying to pin Silas Vane down for a decade. He's slippery. He hides behind shell companies. But if we can prove he knowingly enforced an illegal contract after the 2019 reform. She smiled, a predatory expression that matched Vane's own. Then he doesn't just owe the state a fine. He owes your wife every penny she paid over the legal limit. And he goes to prison. How do we prove it? Arthur asked. It's his word against hers. Not if he admits it, Clara said. We need one last transaction. One last meeting. We wire her up. We get him to say the quiet part out loud. The threats, the interest rates, the blackmail. Arthur hesitated. He thought of Martha's trembling hands in the parking lot. I can't ask her to face him again. She's terrified. She's been facing him alone for 20 years, Mr. Pendelton, Clara said softly. She's stronger than you think. But this time, she needs to know the cavalry is waiting just out of sight. Arthur drove home in silence, the plan heavy in his chest. When he walked into the kitchen, Martha was waiting, her eyes red-rimmed but expectant. She saw the look on his face, not defeat, but a terrifying resolve. Arthur returns home and takes Martha's trembling hands in his. You have to meet him next Tuesday, he says, but this time you won't be alone. The following Tuesday arrived with the weight of a judgment day, the sky hanging low and gray over Maple Creek. The wind had picked up, stripping the last of the dead leaves from the oaks in Oakwood Park, a secluded nature reserve on the edge of town where the summer crowds had long since vanished. It was the perfect place for a quiet transaction or an ambush. Inside a nondescript plumbing van parked 50 yards from the main lot, the air was thick with static and tension. Inspector Clara Vance adjusted the gain on a receiver unit that looked more like a military radio than police equipment. Arthur sat beside her, his hands clasped so tightly between his knees that his knuckles were white. Through the windshield, they watched Martha's silver Honda sitting alone in the center of the asphalt. Check 1 2. Martha's voice came through the speaker, tinny but clear. Can you hear me? Loud and clear, Mrs. Pendelton, Clara said into her headset. Remember, don't look at the van. Keep him talking. We need him to confirm the terms of the loan and the threats against your mother's property. Once he says it, give the signal. I understand, Martha whispered. Arthur leaned toward the microphone. I'm right here, Martha. We're all right here. You are the bravest woman I know. At exactly 10:47 a.m., the black Lexus rolled into the park entrance. It moved with a predatory slowness, crunching over the gravel before pulling up alongside the Honda. Arthur felt a surge of primitive rage seeing the car again, but he forced himself to breathe. This wasn't a fist fight. It was a demolition. Silas Vane stepped out, wrapping a cashmere scarf around his neck against the biting wind. He looked annoyed. He tapped on Martha's window, and she stepped out to meet him. She looked small next to him, wrapped in her old wool coat, but Arthur knew the steel that was hidden underneath. "You changed the location," Vane said, his voice crackling through the van's speakers. "I don't like changes, Martha. And I don't see an envelope." "I don't have it, Silas," Martha said, her voice shaking just enough to sound authentic. "I can't do it anymore. The pension, it's not enough. We need food. We need heat." Vane sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "We have an agreement. The restructuring in 2019 was clear. You pay, or the collateral is forfeit. Do you want your mother evicted at 80 years old? Is that what you want?" "But the interest," Martha pressed, stepping closer. "You're charging me 25%. My husband says that's illegal in Ohio." "He says." "I don't care what your husband says," Vane snapped, his veneer of civility cracking. "And I don't care about Ohio state statutes. I operate on my own terms. You signed the paper, Martha. You agreed to the 25% to keep my lawyers away from your father's estate. If you stop paying now, I will take the house, I will take your car, and I will garnish whatever wages you think you're hiding." In the van, Clara Vance grinned. "Gotcha," she whispered. On the pavement, the change in Martha was instantaneous. The hunch in her shoulders vanished. She lifted her chin, looking Silas Vane dead in the eye. "You don't own this town, Silas," she said, her voice steady and loud. "And you definitely don't own me anymore." She reached up and brushed her hair behind her ear. The signal. Sirens don't wail. Instead, unmarked cars silently block the exits. As Silas turns to run, he sees Arthur stepping out of the van, not with fear, but with a grim smile of victory. Justice is often slow, but when it finally arrives, it tastes sweeter than the finest wine, or in Martha's case, sweeter than an Italian gelato. 6 months had passed since the arrest in Oakwood Park, and the seasons in Maple Creek had turned. The biting gray frost of November had thawed into a vibrant, blooming May. The oak trees that had been bare witnesses to Martha's terror were now lush with green canopies, shading the sidewalks where children rode bicycles without a care in the world. Inside the Pendelton house, the change was even more profound. The silence that once felt heavy and secretive had been replaced by the sound of jazz playing softly from the kitchen radio. Arthur sat at the table, reading the Maple Creek Gazette. The front-page headline was no longer a source of dread. Local lender indicted on 40 counts of fraud. State recovers millions for victims. Silas Vane hadn't just lost his business. He had lost his freedom. The plea deal Inspector Clara Vance negotiated ensured he would spend the next decade in federal prison, and his assets were liquidated to pay restitution. Martha walked in from the garden, her hands dusted with soil, looking 5 years younger than she had that winter. She placed a vase of fresh tulips on the table, right next to the envelope that had arrived yesterday. It was a check from the State Department of Financial Institutions. It wasn't just a refund. It was an apology in numerical form. Every penny of the illegal interest she had paid since the 2019 restructuring, plus damages. "It still feels unreal," Martha said, tracing the edge of the envelope. "To have it back. To be done." "It's real," Arthur said, folding the paper. "And it's yours. Or rather, it's ours, to do what we should have done years ago." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, rectangular travel wallet. He slid it across the table. Martha opened it, her breath catching in her throat. Inside were 2 round-trip tickets to Rome, departing next month, and a reservation for a villa in Tuscany. "Happy 25th anniversary, a little late," Arthur smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I made sure to get the travel insurance. You know, just in case." Martha laughed, a sound that was light and free of burden. "You and your contingencies." "We have plenty left over," Arthur continued, his tone turning serious but warm. "We talked about the roof, and maybe a new car. But I was thinking about what you said, about how alone you felt." "I was thinking that too," Martha nodded. I don't want anyone else in this town to feel that way. I was thinking we could set up a fund. A legal aid clinic for seniors. We could call it the Brennan Foundation after Dad. I think Robert would like that, Arthur said softly, turning a mistake into a safety net. They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between two people who have weathered a storm and come out the other side still holding hands. Arthur glanced at the wall clock. It was Tuesday. The time was exactly 10:47 a.m. In another life, in the long winter of the past 20 years, this was the minute Martha would have been rushing out the door, heart pounding, driving toward her tormentor. But today, she didn't move. She didn't check her watch. She simply picked up her coffee mug, took a slow sip, and looked out the window at the sunlight filtering through the new leaves. The ritual was broken. The clock was just a clock. Arthur looks at his wife and realizes that while the money is gone, the 20 years weren't wasted. They proved that their love could survive even the darkest secrets.